Today, I want to start off with a question, and that question is this: how do you love? How do you love? For some of us, we lean this way, and this is you're forgiven. It's going to be okay. Everything's going to be all right. There's just a lot of grace, and so some of us tend to, when we love, we lean in that direction, and we go towards grace. For others of us, we lean in the other direction, and we lean on the side of truth. And that's how we love. And, there's standards and there's rules, and we should abide by them. And so that's how we love other people. And so some of us are on the truth side, some of us are on the grace side. For some of us, we're thinking, okay, well, it just really depends on the situation. And in certain situations we're leaning toward, it doesn't matter. And other situations, no, you got to obey the rules. And so it's situation dependent for some of us. But regardless of where we're at, most of us, though, lean one way or the other. Most of us are naturally wired to go one way or the other. So when we think about that, the question then comes, well, if that's how we're naturally wired, if we lean one way or the other, but how should we love? I mean, if we're following Jesus and trying to do what he wants us to do and live a life that pleases God, well, then how should we love? Should we go more toward the grace and things you're forgiven and it doesn't really matter, everything is going to be all right, it's all going to work out. But then what about the standards? What about the rules? What about the laws? What about the this is what we should do? And if we go over here, but then what about grace? If we're over here too much, then there's no room for mistakes. And surely there's room for mistakes, but if we have too many mistakes, well then, and it's all grace, well then, what about the law? Don't the rules count? Or don't they count for something? And so if we're too much over here, well then, what about the rules? Must be a percentage then, right? Is it 50-50? Is that what we've got to do? We got to walk right down the middle. We got to go 50-50. Is that what we should do? Now, some of us are on the rule side. We're like maybe 75-25. and then, but when it comes to our lives, we want to go 75 grace and maybe 25 rules, right? We want more grace for us, but when it comes to other people, we want maybe more rules for them, right? So what is it? How should we approach our idea of love? Should it be more truth-based or more grace-based? Or what should the percentage be, and how should we navigate that? But then the question becomes, well, if we're trying to follow Jesus and do what he says to do, well then, how does Jesus love? How does he approach this idea of grace and truth? And how does he love? Because he should be our example. We should be following him, and so surely we should want to know then, well, how does he approach life? And how does he approach things? And one day he said this. He said, a new command I give you. Love one another. He says, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. So as Jesus loved other people, that's how we should love. And so if we're followers of Jesus, then we should want to love the way he loved. And so we should want to know, well, Jesus, then where do you come down on this whole idea of grace and truth? Because when I think about you and the little bit I know about you, I hear some things about grace, and we sing about amazing grace and all of that. But then I know your book is full of laws and rules and standards. And so, Jesus, how do you navigate this tension between grace and truth? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And one day, Jesus was teaching at the temple. And as he's teaching at the temple, some religious leaders bring to him a woman who had been caught in adultery. And as they come and bring him to her, they say, Jesus, our rules, our law, our holy scriptures that God gave to Moses, he says, they tell us that we should stone this woman to death. Because that's what the rules say. That's what the law says. Jesus, what do you say? What should we do with this woman? And Jesus tries to tell them. And so Jesus says, all right, you want to play this game? I'll play this game with you, because they were just playing a game with Jesus. They were just trying to trick him into saying something wrong and all of that. And so Jesus says, okay, I'll play your game. And he says, whoever has not sinned can throw the first stone. Anyone here in the audience, those of you who've brought this woman, anybody here who can hear my voice, anybody, if you've not sinned, then you can throw the first stone. It says one by one, the men who had brought this woman just walked away. And at that, after they had all walked away, and after there's this tension, there's still the woman left standing in front of Jesus. And so what is Jesus going to do with this woman? And he says, has no one condemned you? There she is waiting to hear from Jesus. What is Jesus going to do with her? And he says, has no one condemned you? They all walked away. And so Jesus says, she says, no one, sir. Nobody has condemned me. Jesus says, then neither do I condemn you. Jesus says, neither do I condemn you. See, that's grace. Jesus is not going to condemn her. He's going to forgive her. And so Jesus, in this moment, shows us that we're to be all about grace. But Jesus, what about the truth? She did break the law. She didn't say she didn't do it. Jesus, what about this side of the equation? What about this part of love? Well, Jesus wasn't finished. He says this. He says, go now and leave your life of sin. That's the truth. That's the truth part. There is rules. There is standards as we're seeking to follow Jesus. And as we're seeking to love like Jesus, there's this idea of truth. Well, Jesus, now I'm really, really confused here. Because in the same situation, you showed both grace and truth. So Jesus, how in the world are we supposed to figure this out? How in the world are we supposed to love like you when we're trying to figure out, okay, Jesus, are you grace or are you truth? And what's the percentage here? Is it 50-50? But it wasn't 50-50. Jesus poured grace and truth into the same situation. And John, who was there, as he's writing his account of the life of Jesus, as he's writing all of this down, he tells us how Jesus loved. And as he's trying to figure all this out, this is how John explained it earlier in his account. He says this. He says, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. That he's talking about Jesus. He says, we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Full of grace. And at the same time, full of truth. Not 50-50. 100. Full of grace. And at the same time, full of truth. And there's a tension there. But we want to resolve the tension. We want to figure this out. In our situations, we want to either be grace or we want to be truth. And Jesus says no. Jesus says full of grace. And at the same time, full of truth. And yet most of us lean in one direction or the other. And so if you're a parent, and as you're trying to figure out dads how to be a good dad and moms how to be a good mom, as you're trying to figure this out, generally speaking, you're going to lean in one direction or the other. For some of you, you're going to lean a little more towards grace, and others of you are going to lean a little more toward truth. And the interesting thing is that if you're leaning a little more toward grace, you probably married a truth person. And so if you're a truth person, you probably married a grace person. And so in your household, you have full of grace and full of truth in the same household, many of you. So as you parent, think about how can I approach my kids? How can I approach my parenting? Where it's both. Because if you get a little more toward too much grace, well then the rules don't matter. And there are no standards and things like that. But if you get a little too much truth, well then it can become rigid and cold and relationally distant. There's no room for mistakes if there's too much truth. So Jesus says, if you're going to be a good parent, if you're going to follow me and love your kids the way I have loved you, he said you got to be full of grace and full of truth. The same is true at work if we're a boss and you have your people that report to you. Sometimes there can be a little more too much truth and not enough grace. Because some of you are laying down the law and because that's the way your boss did you, and so you're just going to follow in those footsteps, and there it is. There's no room for mistakes, and if you make a mistake, you're going to get yelled at or worse. Others of you, you kind of lean more toward grace and, everything is good and everything's great, and it doesn't matter that you missed your sales quota and all of this, that it's going to be all right. And then you're never going to get anything done or never going to accomplish anything. And so it has to be full of grace and full of truth. That's what Jesus says we should do as we're trying to love like he loved us. And what about your attitude toward other people? Like as we think about other people, how do we approach things? How do we approach that with them? Are we leaning more toward grace and it doesn't matter how you live your life and you just do what you want to do, there's nothing out there, Or are we over here and saying, hey, you got to do this and this and this and this? And you messed up, well, there's no room for that, and you got to do this and this. If we're going to follow Jesus and love the way he loved us, he says we are full of grace and full of truth. And I want you to know here today that that's the church that we're striving to be. Because it's true that the church is at its best when it embraces grace and truth and refuses to let go of either. The church is at its best when we're exhibiting 100% grace and 100% truth at the same time, in the same situation. That means, but when we do that, we love like Jesus. And I want you to know here today that we're trying to get this right. And we don't get it right all the time, but I want you to know that that's what we're striving for. But when we do that means it's complicated. We want to resolve the tension, and our natural inclination is to just resolve the tension to either be grace or truth. Because the tension and trying to do both is messy and hard and complicated at times. But I want you to know that that's the church that we're striving to be. Because some of us grew up in a church where it was a lot of grace and not a whole lot of truth. And when things didn't go right? You didn't live up to the standards. It didn't really matter. You could just kind of do what you wanted to do, and there was just so much grace. And you were thinking maybe there's got to be some rules around here. We gotta live. It just didn't feel right. Others of you may have grown up in a more truth kind of church where there was this and this and this, and there was room for grace when it came to being saved, but that was about it. That's where the grace kind of stopped, and it was all about the rules. And some of you left thinking, well, we're not all perfect, and there's got to be room for us to make a mistake from time to time. There's got to be some grace somewhere. So, for Jesus, as we seek to follow him, I want you to know that we're trying our best to be a church that's full of grace and full of truth, and we're trying to do it at the same time, and we're refusing to let go of either. And that means it's going to be messy, and it's going to be difficult, and it's going to be complicated at times. But if we're trying to inspire people to follow Jesus, which is what our mission is, then we ourselves need to love like Jesus loved. And so if you're here today and you would say you're not a Jesus follower and you're trying to figure it all out and you're not quite sure about all of this, I just want you to know up front that there is a standard. There is a rule, there is a law. And all of us have fallen short of that. None of us have measured up and lived up to the rule and the standard that God has set. But at the same time, there is grace. There is forgiveness. There is mercy. Because of what Jesus did for us. That he stood in the middle of grace and truth. Because we didn't measure up. And he took our place. And he took our punishment. And he took our guilt. And he took our shame. Because we didn't live up to the truth. And he said there's a way to receive forgiveness and grace and mercy. And it's if you accept what I have done for you. If you've accepted that, then you're forgiven. But then he says, go now and sin no more. And so if you're here today and you've not ever accepted what Jesus has done for you, you can do that today by just telling God that you want to do that. And if you've done that, I'll be outside afterwards. Scotty will be out there. We'd love to know that. We'd love to pray with you. But for those of you who've decided to follow Jesus already, and maybe it's been a month, maybe it's been a year, maybe it's been several years. As we seek to follow Jesus, we need to love others as he has loved us. And that means that we live a life, that we love others in a way that's full of grace and full of truth. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your grace, your love, your mercy, your forgiveness. God, I pray that you would help us when we're in situations, when we're going through life, when we're at home, when we're at work, when we're hanging out with friends. God, I pray that you would help us to see the situation like you see it. God, that you would help us to love like you love. God, that you would help us to understand in that situation how to have grace and truth at the same time. Pray this in Jesus' name.